A frigid Friday night.
A frigid Friday night indeed. You know, John, it's interesting. It was it yesterday or the day before was the coldest day of the year so far?
I don't know. Every day's cold right now.
And we're complaining, and I got friends in Canada, they're posting on Facebook -32, and I'm like, at least it's not bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, anything under 40 is now cold. So
Exactly, exactly.
Fahrenheit. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm like, and I'm so soft now too. I was like, well, I was gonna ride outside this weekend. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be 60 and windy. Nah, just ride inside.
No, totally. I rode in my garage and even that was cold and I got a hat on and it's just yeah, this is terrible. And both of us grew up in cold weather climates. I think that's part of it is, I still remember, just just the cold falls, the cold winters and now I don't think I could not take a hard winter at this point.
No, I'm the same. Like, if it ever happened that maybe I don't know, broke some law and I got deported, I don't think I could take it. I'd have to send me to Mexico, deport
Yeah,
me that way.
deport me south.
I can't go north. I just can't. But
No.
no, it's interesting, right? And especially being triathletes and trying to train outside.
Hmm.
Um, Even this afternoon, I got out just for like a little half-hour run, and I put gloves on.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Like I would have never put gloves on at 60 degrees, and I'm purposely looking to get in the sun. Like I don't want to run that route because it's too shady.
Yeah. Well, and it's fun, 'cause again, just like you, I've got friends back east still, and they just got hit with that big snowmageddon or whatever they're
Yep.
calling it at this point. And obviously we go back and forth on messages, and fortunately here we don't have to shovel sunshine, I always say. So
Exactly, exactly.
the
So did
snow
you?
is fun to visit, but and maybe for a day or two to get snowed in is sort of nostalgic, but yeah, after a day or two, it's you go cabin crazy. So.
And we got a big weekend in Vegas. We get the Pro Bowl here. The NHL All-Star Game is here. I mean, it's kind of weird they're both the same weekend, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I don't know another city that's done that. But yeah, before we started, I was razzing you a little bit about not coming over and seeing the
I
Stanley
know.
Cup.
I know. John was the keeper of the Stanley Cup on Tuesday afternoon at UNLV. Were you
Yeah.
the security, weren't you?
I wasn't, but yeah, we had security there, believe it or not.
Oh, I know. It doesn't travel without security.
No, it's pretty amazing. And that's, someone's job is to just travel with the cup and take it to different places. And
Yeah,
it
that's
was
super
pretty
cool.
neat. Yeah, yeah. We had people lining up before it even came out of the box. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a really big sports weekend in Las Vegas because of those two things. And there's a ton of like minor league things that are going on with it, like the NHL supporting some local stuff, and the Pro Bowl has like flag football for kids and adults. And it's interesting. I've had multiple people call me this week. Hey, do you know any athletic trainers that can work? I'm like,
Oh, wow.
everybody's working
Yeah.
this weekend. And I even said, because I don't really work clinically very much anymore, like out in the field. I'm like, for $100 an hour, I might come out. And
Yeah.
they go, oh,
Yeah.
we can do 60. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. I don't, because I looked at the weather. I'm like, it's too cold. It's 60 degrees. I'm not going to stand
Yeah.
outside.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. And to that point, we in terms of everything that's going on, we had the NHL female executive panel last night, which was really informative. And we also had a number of representatives from a number of different sport teams here in town, and it's amazing who's there. And talking with people from the Raiders, from MGM, even is big into sports and UFC, and our town has changed really dramatically.
If you think about it, like, when I came to town or when you came to town, there was UNLV sports,
Yeah, that's right.
and in the 51 baseball team.
And Cirque du Soleil, but
Yeah.
a different type of sport, but
Yeah.
certainly professional athletes, that's for sure.
Well, when I moved to town, Cirque du Soleil only had one show.
Oh,
It was
okay.
just Mystere,
Yeah.
and that was it. So you think about that, there was really only one performance medicine, even.
Mhm.
So yeah, times have changed, and it seems like it's pretty exponential in the last few years. It just keeps growing, and one of these days we'll actually get an Ironman event back in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and it's funny, actually, someone was asking me about that. They said, "Well, what about that race that was in Henderson?" I said, "Yeah,"
Yeah.
and obviously that was one I'm not too sure which one they were talking about because there obviously was the Silverman, but then there's also the World Championship, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one they were remembered, but they did remember that. But St. George, a couple hour drive north, and they are trying to be the sports endurance capital of the world. So uh,
Yep.
we
Yep.
can we can sort of adopt them,
We can
St.
adopt.
George.
We can adopt them
Yeah.
for sure. It's going to be a suburb of Las Vegas before long,
You
anyways.
got to come through Vegas to get to St. George. So
It's true.
uh,
Good week of training. Did you get out there at all, or?
no, my training's run into a little bit of an issue now, but this is part of just trying to have the mindset for the season is the theme for this year is to enjoy the journey.
Yep.
And so even when things aren't going right, you still got to figure out, well, how do I enjoy the journey? And it's stressful when things don't go well or when you have something going on. And so, it's hard. So you really I try to take a step back and just try to focus on some things that are going okay. So
Yeah, and we've talked about many times triathlon. The commitment level that we've chose to make it, it has to be fun,
yeah, right,
right?
right.
And if it gets to a point where it's more stress than fun,
Yeah.
it's not a good thing.
Mhm.
And so that being said, this will kind of takes us into our topic tonight, and that's gastrointestinal distress. And why I brought that up is because a lot of GI issues are related to just stress in general.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I would contend sometimes it's the stress we put on ourselves in sports.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's some good evidence to this that if you actually do meditation and you handle other stresses in your life, your gastrointestinal issues could actually be somewhat mitigated even in endurance sports. It's a pretty complicated, convoluted situation.
Well, trust your gut,
I trust your gut.
right?
Yeah, it's like your mom always told you,
That's
trust
right.
your gut.
And the gut brain connection is so um, strong, and yet it's so hard to figure out what that connection really is.
Yeah.
But yet you're spot on. I mean, a gut can influence the brain, and the brain can influence the gut.
Yeah, it's the term that's bandied around is the gut brain axis.
Yep.
And the amount of neurons in the gut are greater than I think than any other organ system in the body. And the people are just starting to appreciate this.
Mm-hmm.
And for many years it was thought of as two separate entities, but you're spot on with that, is that we need to think about this holistically and as a human as a system, not a bunch of organs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, speaking of the anxiety, I mean, that's that brain driving problems in the gut. And we
Yep.
know that. I mean, anecdotally, we know that. We know we get upset stomach when we're stressed out.
Yep.
And so now, translate that over to endurance events, and we all get a little stressed out race week, right?
Oh, yeah. It's interesting, right? Like the bigger the race, the more GI issues. And there's
Yeah.
actually research on this. Your local 5K, there's not that many GI issues,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but like an Ironman that you're trying to qualify for something, there could be a lot of stress associated with that. Um, and then there's the gastrointestinal part of that. And then we add in unrealistic expectations of ourselves and
Yeah.
not sleeping well, potentially not eating well that week.
And
Uh,
then the unknowns of what's going to unfold in the day,
yeah.
and whether the weather's going to change in one way or the other, and yeah, you're all of a sudden you're anxious going in, and you're already behind the eight ball in terms of a healthy gut.
So, John, let me ask you a question. You and I, we both lamented over gastrointestinal issues, and we both obviously have talked to a lot of triathletes and heard from a lot of triathletes. I personally know very few triathletes that have not had some gastrointestinal distress. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think the numbers are extremely high in terms of during a race, how many people experience GI distress. And obviously, it's a range of GI distress, but it's almost unheard of someone not eventually having some GI problem. Like
Yep.
when you hear all these phrases, in terms of what's going to happen with the gut during a race. So it's pretty
You
common.
know, it is really common, and once again, there's as many possible issues or as many ideas of what causes it,
Yeah.
right? And I read the book The Athlete's Gut, and it was really an interesting read, and it was some good ideas on things to potentially try, but there was no silver bullet
Mm-hmm.
for any of this. There's things you can try,
Mm-hmm.
and there's things that will work one time and not work the next time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very few actual research articles on this and actually on treating it and successfully treating it in especially like our double-blind randomized controlled trials. It's very much anecdotal as far as what to do to mitigate these things.
Well, and even to make it a little bit worse is a lot of times you get conflicting information. It's, well, you're dehydrated, so drink more. Oh, you're overhydrated, and that's why you're having GI problems. Or you don't have enough electrolytes. Oh no, do you have too much electrolytes? So you're getting, there's all this conflicting information. And I know this and you know this because we've run into GI problems. And so we have tried to figure out for us, for an N of one, how do we solve that? And it is, it's a tough, you just chase your tail sometimes.
I was reading an article today. I wasn't going to bring this up, but since you brought up, the opposite advice, it was in one article. It said, you really want to decrease your fiber and go to a diet. And this is like a very common diet that we actually go to in sports medicine with people who have GI issues. It's called the Brat Diet. So bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast.
Okay.
And so it says decrease your fiber, but then once it says rice, then it says, but you'd be better off to have whole grain rather than white rice. I'm like, that is the exact opposite of what the purpose of this diet is the diet is to, like, and you even said decrease fiber, but of course whole grain is better than white rice, but it's not in this context. And it's interesting, like there's so many mixed messages out there that it really is a very, very difficult thing to go down. I mean, John, I've went so far as to, and I'll share this with the podcast. I mean, I have had stool samples taken. I've actually had my whole microbiome cultured. I've done fecal fat testing, fecal protein enzyme testing to try and figure out like why I have GI diarrhea while running. And trust me, I've literally tried everything. And nothing seems to move the needle.
And it's unpredictable.
And it's unpredictable
when you get the GI problems, and it's hard to, and because both of us experienced this, it's hard to replicate the situation and then try something different and replicate it again and test it out. It's really, it's so, I hate to use this phrase, it's overused, but it's multifactorial. It's so many things going on.
It is. And, and so ultimately, I guess, the first thing is to maybe just have a little rundown of gastrointestinal issues and what they are, and some differences in them, because that's the other thing is, we think about the gastrointestinal system. I mean, it starts at your mouth and ends at your rectum, right? And so there's a lot of stops along the way. And there's a lot of places along the way where people can actually have symptomology. I mean, really, it can start in your mouth with reflux, right? Like, so acid reflux coming up from your stomach, nausea and vomiting, which I know you've suffered from, and then all the way down to diarrhea or constipation, and ultimately everything in between.
Yeah, sorry, I know you're going this way, but I will talk about GI problems from an upper and a lower GI system.
Yeah, and this is really good, because when you type in and you read, gastrointestinal issues with runners, oftentimes you'll just get an article on diarrhea or on nausea. Well, the truth is you could have, you can have either, right? And so when we talk about upper GI, we're talking about things basically from the stomach up. So think about like the stomach, the esophagus, the mouth. And the most common in sports is actually gastroesophageal reflux disorder. So
Mm.
that's just the contents of the stomach coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And then second to that is probably nausea. And nausea is a really interesting thing, because this is total brain
Yeah.
stomach connection.
Mm-hmm.
And what causes nausea in one person won't cause it in another.
No.
And this is really, really difficult thing, especially when the nausea gets to the point of vomiting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what ultimately what causes somebody to vomit, once again, John, multifactorial.
Yeah.
Right? So I can make you vomit.
Mm-hmm.
Just put you in a hot dog eating contest.
Yeah.
Right? Like we can do that, but like,
Uh-huh.
what makes you vomit when you're exercising? What makes you have gastroesophageal reflux disorder? Actually, let's talk about that one maybe first before we get into vomiting.
Okay.
So gastroesophageal reflux disorder, or some people, it's heartburn. It's actually interesting because the research actually says it does happen in runners, but we actually see more of it in swimming.
Hmm.
And the thought is the horizontal position of the esophagus. So you don't have gravity pulling the contents of the stomach back down.
Okay.
And so that is an issue, and it's unfortunately something that I've struggled with. Back many years ago, when I was an athletic trainer for the swim team at UNLV, many athletes would have this happen. The good news with that one is it's usually, especially early on, pretty easy to treat. But later on, like when it becomes chronic, it becomes really, really difficult.
Well, and even just the seasickness, I know that's a little different mechanism than what you're talking about, but yeah, even just being seasick is
Yeah. Well, so if we get into the past the reflux disease and get into actually nausea, I'm glad you mentioned seasickness, because some people think that the nausea in endurance athletes, especially with running, might be actually caused by something very similar, and that's the movement of the head.
Hmm.
Right? And you can see, like, most of our elite runners have a very, very still head when they run. Yeah, there's a little bit of vertical oscillation, but you can look at some of the, I guess, less elite runners, and there's a lot of movement back and forth, up and down. And they can become nauseated just from that, especially if they are more likely to have like motion sickness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, that's one of the areas. Then there's also the thought of just the jostling of the stomach inside, inside our thorax, or our abdominal cavity, of just moving up and down, and just the constant movement can potentially lead to nausea. Then we have, once again, the connection, the brain gut connection, and ultimately the balance of not just the nervous system, but the nervous system and the hormonal system. We do know that like stress hormones like cortisol increase nausea,
Yeah.
also increase diarrhea. So how do you figure it out when it's, once again,
Well, and
multifactorial?
and and I'm really interested in this brain gut connection, especially with nausea, because I mean, again, just an anecdote. If you smell something bad, you can get nauseous. Or, at Indian Wells, unfortunately, someone had GI distress and unfortunately defecated all over himself, but he continued to race, which, that comes into a health issue for other athletes. But in any case, that smell obviously makes other people nauseous. So you have this other element to it as well. So,
It's an interesting thing. This has been a connection that's been known, especially in Eastern medicine, for a long time, because
yeah.
there's many treatments. You look up for acupuncture, acupressure,
Hmm.
specifically for nausea, that work really, really well.
Yeah.
Um, if it wasn't somehow a nervous system issue, or at least sometimes a nervous system issue, that shouldn't work.
No, right, right.
Right.
It's not just physiological in the sense of you ate something that made your stomach
Yeah.
upset or too hard to digest. There there is a neural component to it.
I think at this point we should maybe explain one other thing, and that's the blood flow issue in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And not just the stomach, but the gastrointestinal tract. So we've talked a little bit about the nervous system before, and the autonomic nervous system, and the balance between parasympathetic and sympathetic. We did it when we talked about the HRV.
Yeah.
So it's the same, very similar mechanisms in the gastrointestinal system. Is that when you're, and the best number to think of is if you're below that aerobic threshold, so think zone 2 and below, you actually have increased blood flow
Mm-hmm.
to the stomach and to the gastrointestinal system. Then is when you go above zone 2, so you get into the more sympathetic, and the more sympathetic you get, the less blood flow you have to your stomach and your other gastrointestinal organs. And this is a little bit of a misnomer. And I've actually ran into people that, exercise causes decreased blood flow to the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Light exercise causes increased blood flow. And so one of the things that I was actually thinking about with this was, if you're doing most of your training in zone 2, which a lot of us do, but then you race in zone 3 and 4, have somehow you changed the dominance of blood flow based off of, now you're in that more sympathetic fight or flight situation. And could that be leading to this especially upper and lower gastro GI issues?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's I like this because there is a hormonal component to digestion and how your system's operating, but the blood flow is so critical because, well, that's how absorption's happening, is the blood flow has to get to the gut if you're trying to absorb something. And if you have something that is hard to digest, you're going to require more blood flow. But if you're exercising, that's generating heat. And so then what the body does to get rid of that heat is to shunt the blood towards the skin and away from the gut. And so it's this funny balance. And the intensity part also starts to shut down some GI activity, because that's why a lot of times you don't necessarily always have to go to the bathroom when you're exercising hard, is because the body is it's diverting things away from digestion.
And you definitely don't feel hungry. Like if
Yeah,
you're
right.
going out and you're running hard, you'll never feel hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, if you go out for a 3 or 4 hour bike ride at zone 1, zone 2, you can definitely feel hungry.
Yeah, right.
But if you're going hard, you will feel hungry. And it is super interesting, an interesting connection. So, one of the other things that happens when you have decreased blood flow to the stomach is, you mentioned absorption, which is super critical. We can get into that, but it's also having to do with how we dissolve food,
Mm-hmm.
foodstuffs in our stomach. And ultimately, if we have lack of blood flow, we're actually going to have delayed gastric emptying. So actually, the contents of the stomach, it takes longer to get out of the stomach into the small intestine. But then if it doesn't dissolve properly in the stomach, it won't absorb properly.
That's right.
And so that's another piece. And it's actually one of the reasons that when we race, we go to simple sources of food, right? The last thing you want to do is, on your race is like, oh, hey, it looks good. That cheeseburger looks really good right now.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a good option, because it's not going to be dissolved properly in your stomach and ultimately absorbed. And it's literally just going to sit in your stomach for a long time.
No, that's right. And I love the bringing up the gastric emptying, because the absorption that we're talking about is not happening in the stomach. It's happening in the GI tract.
Yeah. And most of the absorption, especially of nutrients, I think it's like 95 to 97% happens in the small intestine. And a majority of it is in the first third of the small intestine.
Yep. And the fluids as well. And so the whole idea is to get something into the stomach, but then to empty the stomach, the gastric. And so you do need to have a way to get, or a system that moves things, and we refer to as the gastric emptying. And there's lots of things that can influence how quickly the gastric empties.
And it's I guess the next step of this, and I know we're sticking more to the upper GI stuff, is, and we've talked about this before, of training the gut,
Yeah.
right? So one of the mechanisms we think of when we're training the gut is actually training it to actually have those sugar sources, your glucose, your fructose, galactose, all those, sugars. So the stomach is used to having them, and it's used to basically moving them. The other thing that I would contend in a mistake that people make, athletes make, I've seen it lots of times, is, and I think we've talked about this before, is having a gel without water.
Yeah, right.
Because now you're not dissolving and you're not allowing for, think about it. It's the perfect example. You throw a gel in your stomach, what's going to happen? It's going to just kind of stick there. And if anything, it's actually going to draw water out and into the stomach, like out of your body, and technically will be dehydrating you from the inside out. And there's been many a race ruined by too many gels and not enough water.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, we reviewed a paper a while ago on training the gut, and one of the ideas that I really liked, and I haven't tried it yet, was to practice taking in a lot of fluid into the stomach and practicing getting that as filled as possible. But I got to jump in here. Bob posted a nice question that goes right along with this. He just got home. Did you plan to address too much carbohydrate causing an insulin spike and a sugar crash?
Not today, but we can, because that is a real thing. And maybe what we need to do, honestly, is and I know he's been on before, is actually have Dr. Barnes come on and talk about continuous blood glucose monitor and talk about that specific thing. Because there's like reactive hypoglycemia, which once again is something that I've been dealing with, and I know he's worked with patients with that before. So I think that would be really good to talk about, because that's not, it's not that it's not a gastrointestinal issue. That's actually more of the pancreas and an endocrine issue. But yeah, it's something we definitely should.
But it does come into play when you start making food choices to take during an endurance. And one of the ideas right now is what Bob is alluding to, is this: you want to avoid these ups and downs in insulin.
Yeah, and I guess we can just briefly touch on it. One of the ways you can avoid that is just keep the sugar coming.
Yeah.
No, seriously, like that's one of the things, is you'll never crash if you have sugar every 15 minutes. You won't crash. It's when you have a bunch of sugar and then you don't have any, then you will crash.
Well, but this does get us right into GI distress, because this is how I always explain to my students in class: is think about having a Snickers bar for breakfast, for a snack, for lunch, for an after lunch snack, and having a Snickers bar for dinner.
That sounds lovely.
Somewhere along the way, you're going to have an upset stomach because you've just eaten all that. But obviously, I'm not talking about exercise, which changes the.
Yeah, because I would contend that if you had a mini Snickers bar every 15 minutes, and you kept your blood sugar level, you might not feel as bad.
I think we'll have to try this one out.
Well, the thing is that athletes are doing this, right? Basically having a gel every 15 to
that's my point, is that you're doing an iron distance race that is lasting longer than 12 hours. I mean, your breakfast, lunch, and dinner is all sugar. Eventually you just don't want sugar at that. Somewhere along the way, sometimes your body just says, "Nah, I'm done."
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think pretty much anyone that's done long distance racing gets to the point where they are sugared out.
Yeah,
they just cannot have any more, and I think this is, once again, a brain gut connection thing. It's more of, it's a brain thing. Like, could you actually ingest more sugar? Sure, you could, but you don't want to, right? And now that's a motivation in your brain. It's not necessarily coming from your stomach or your muscles or your blood sugar levels. It oftentimes is more of a mental thing. And it's one of the reasons that some people I know, they actually for their gels will have 5 or 6 different flavors on their bike, right? So it's always something different. And we get into some of these gels now that are more like the what do they call it, like sultry flavors. Like maybe you get like an espresso flavor, and there was one, I think it was maple bacon
Hmm.
is one, right? So because it mixes it up. It's if you're always having like lemon lime, lemon lime, lemon lime. I think I actually think that's more of a mental.
So yeah, I think you're right, but it's sugar fatigue, and at the same time, I
Is it
don't want to
sugar
give the
fatigue or flavor fatigue?
yeah, but I don't want to give the impression that the GI distress isn't real,
Oh
because
no,
there are
yeah.
times where, and I've been there, you can't put anything in your system because it's coming right back up.
No,
Whereas,
but that's when you've gotten to the point where it's literally nausea and
yeah,
vomiting, right?
right. But you and I have talked about this because again,
Yeah.
I've experienced this a lot. In fact, I'll share one of my favorite pictures.
Oh no, we don't want to see pictures of you puking.
Oh no, it's not me puking, but this looks like
Yeah,
a nice race picture, right? That's not me.
that's not you though.
This is me back here, hunched over, and this is Laura. She was actually going. We crossed paths, and this was Boulder, and it was one of the races that I famously had a GI breakdown, and I could not take anything, even though I have a bottle here. I'm
Yeah,
sure it's empty or it's full, and I'm not able to take anything in. GI distress is real,
yeah.
and
Oh,
it's hard to overcome. And sometimes you get to a point where you can't take in fuel, and now you're trying to do a marathon, a half marathon, whatever the distance is, with no internal calories. And so now that just reduces you to walking, most likely.
yeah,
So,
yeah. You're going to basically be having to rely on your own endogenous fat storage
hmm.
and whatever you can possibly metabolize from from that. You know, you're 100% right. I know you've struggled with a lot, and and I hope I wasn't downplaying it at all, because I know
No, no, no. Yeah.
it is a real thing. And when you get to that point, then I mean, John, how many times have you gotten to that point and you're what what could I have done different?
Yeah, right.
Like, what did I do?
Well, always.
Like,
I mean,
always.
and the problem is that, like you're talking about with the different flavors. I mean, what you try, oh, let me just try the lemon lime. Let me try this one. When you're sitting around just, trying things taste differently than when you're exercising. They taste differently when the gel heats up or your drink heats up and it's a hot day. They
Yep.
taste differently with intensity of exercise. They digest differently. And back to the anxiety part, things taste differently when you are having that mental stress as well.
No, you're absolutely right. And once again, this is multifactorial and everyone is different.
Hmm.
And in the case of people that are suffering from nausea while exercising, it's going to be many times an N of one, right?
Yeah.
It's what is it that is the catalyst for you
Hmm.
that causes this?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's some ideas, right? Like what we ingest, like the 2 days going in
Yeah.
before the race, and are we, basically going into like almost a protective
Hmm.
diet where it's like I'm going to have nothing at all
Yeah.
that is going to stimulate anything bad, right? So
Right.
we're going to go to no spice,
Yeah.
no fiber,
Yeah.
no fat, no
Hmm.
vegetables.
Hmm.
And sometimes that works, but then sometimes it doesn't. And you know these are difficult things. Um and John, I mean, we've talked about it a lot, is the actual, and we've talked about this in many podcasts, the actual on race nutrition.
Yeah.
We've talked about having backup plans, and
Yeah.
we've talked about we've talked at length about this stuff, but it's difficult. And we both have mentored other people in race nutrition, but it's like I can't guarantee this is going to work for you.
No, that's right. And Paula Newby Frazier, who, what, 6-time Kona Ironman World Championship winner. I
Yep.
think she famously said, when someone asked what's the secret pre-race meal, she goes, "Well, I had pizza before this race. I guess it's pizza." And it's like, how many people would eat pizza? Yeah, I wouldn't eat pizza before an iron distance race. And so to your point, it is so individual. It's really this is what makes understanding the work that is out there hard, and also makes doing research in this area are really difficult.
It's interesting. One of the things that, I tell people is like, you shouldn't do like a half Ironman or an Ironman as your first race. And one of the reasons is to start to figure this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
Do an Olympic distance race and like work on your nutrition that day and
Yeah.
see like, how did it feel? Like at any point, did you have gastrointestinal issues? And, start off, it's not just your legs and your arms. It's your gastrointestinal system. You need to test it and you need to try things. And but I would still contend that a lot of people make that mistake of ingesting too many gels without the water.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh man, I gotta get these calories in. And they make these drinks now, and people make these drinks that are like super, super sugary, right? So, I can have all my calories I want in one bottle for the whole day.
Yeah.
And it's literally a bottle of gel.
Yeah.
And if they don't put water in with it, I think that's a recipe for disaster for your gastrointestinal system.
Yeah, and to your point, there's only so many calories per time, whatever time you want to do, that your body can absorb. There's a limit. There's a threshold. You can't exceed a certain amount, and everyone's a little bit different. And but it is
But
interesting.
what happens? Here's the thing, John. You can ingest more calories.
Oh yeah, but you can't digest it. Yeah.
Right. So that's the key here, right? It's like, what happens to those sugars, or it's sugars? What happens to those sugars when they don't become absorbed?
Yeah.
That's what we believe for a lot of people causes the lower GI issues and maybe even the upper GI issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so we haven't talked too much about the lower GI, and I know we've been talking a long time already, but the lower GI issues in particular, we see more diarrhea than we do constipation in endurance athletes. Not that constipation doesn't happen, but oftentimes there's two main schools of thought. One is taking in too much sugar, and basically it's getting past the small intestine, or at least where it is absorbed in the small intestine. It can stimulate diarrhea. That's one. And then the second one is dehydration.
Right.
But I would also contend that sometimes those go hand in hand, because we're once again drawing water out of the blood and into the intestines to help absorb these things, where it may already be past the point we can actually absorb them. And now we're drawing water in, and that's creating the diarrhea.
Yeah, they definitely go hand in hand. And yeah, we read that paper before this podcast on running diarrhea.
Yeah.
And it is a real problem. But something, maybe I'll switch gears just a little bit. I know you've looked into this, and we also read a paper on this, prepping for this, is the probiotics.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about probiotics?
I would, honestly, I'd love to, because I've been, working with probiotics on and off for years, and trying to find something that once again will help with my GI. And like I said, I even did like the stool cultures and trying to figure out what I was missing and what areas I could supplement with. And number one thing I could tell you is that not every probiotic is good, and not every probiotic will work for what you're trying to cure, right? So if ultimately you're saying, well, I have gastrointestinal issues or diarrhea, okay, well, what probiotic do you need? Well, what probiotic are you lacking? Or what bacterium are you lacking in? So I guess we should maybe just take a step back and really think about the gut, the microbiome. And I know this is a hot topic word these days, the microbiome, and truly understanding what it is ultimately very, very difficult. But there's some estimates that we have 10 times more cells of bacteria cells in our gut than we have human cells in our body. And so the theory is that all we are is we're carrying around bacteria. We're hosts for bacteria. And the bacteria in our gut they're running the show. And they're producing things that are essential for us, but they can also be deleterious. So the theory is that, oh, we can take probiotics to help the good guys, right? The ones that are helping us along the way, and potentially starve out the ones that are potentially negative.
Right.
But
But the trick is,
the trick is, well, the trick is we don't know.
yeah,
Like
there's so many.
there's so many, and here's the thing is there are still many unidentified
Hmm.
bacterium and strains of not strains, it goes down to this, was it species level, that we don't even know what they are.
Right.
Right. And to make matters worse, in general, when you get tested, they actually, you do a stool sample, that's giving you a sample of the bacterium in your lower large intestine.
Hmm.
It's not always going to be representative of what's happening in your small intestine, which is where a lot of this action is ultimately happening.
Hmm.
It's really hard to get a sample of your small intestine's microbiome.
Right.
You got to stick a tube down the throat, and it's really not very feasible. So then in general, what we've done as a society is we said, hey, here's some stuff that will make the good guys happy, and in general, the bad guys, bad bacterium, sad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it starts ultimately, and once again, I'm not an RD, but it starts with nutrition, right? And we do know that there are certain foods that will, in general, feed the good guys and not feed the bad guys. And we call these basic prebiotic foods. Yep. So one of the things that I've learned throughout the years is, the what we do with prebiotics, or what are prebiotics, usually it's the cellulose from vegetables and fruit are like our best sources of these prebiotic foods. And we want to give our bodies as much of a variety of these things as possible to make our bacteria happy and more, I guess, diverse. Mm-hmm. Because the truth of the matter is most Americans are only eating like 10 different types of vegetables a year.
Yeah.
And, there's not enough variety. And, we all fall victim to this. It's, because even if we think we're doing different things, if we look at like families of vegetables, mm-hmm. like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, that's all like the same family.
Yeah, right.
And they basically have the same prebiotic fibers. And so it's difficult to do. So then now we have prebiotic supplements mm-hmm. that people could potentially take. And then the next step is to actually colonize and have us actually taking bacteria that will hopefully colonize good bacteria in our intestines. And so, and John, you've probably read a bunch on this too, that this is very controversial. Does this even do anything, right? Does it move the needle at all?
Well, and the microbiome is not a constant, and it can change, and it can change sometimes really quickly. And so that's part of the problem too, is it's this dynamic thing that influences GI distress. We're quite certain of that. During exercise, but how do you wrap your arms around controlling it is an unknown.
And it's really hard when it's so difficult to measure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why I brought up this whole thing of this controversy of do probiotics actually change the microbiome mm-hmm. is we think so. If we can get the probiotic through the stomach and into the intestines, because one of the things that ultimately happens is if the probiotic gets broken down in the stomach by the stomach acid, it's not going to get, the hydrochloric acid of the stomach is going to kill off these bacteria. It's actually one of the main jobs of the stomach is to not allow things in. Right. So the article that Vernice got us today, which was a pretty interesting one, it was about Lactobacillus plantarum PS128. And the title is that it improves physiologic adaptations and performance in triathletes through gut microbiota modulation. And the most interesting thing on this paper to me was when they looked at the before and after of the species. Mm-hmm. and not just the species, but the things that the species were producing. So we could actually see that there was a change in the percentage of different species in the gut microbiome.
And that was over a 4-week period.
That was over a 4-week period. They made another interesting thing, comment, or had another interesting finding that basically said you increased your endurance. But the measure was not endurance. It was doing a Bruce protocol VO2 test. They didn't increase their VO2, but they went a little longer,
Right.
or they went longer. But that to me wasn't like the big thing. The big thing is this, once again, we seen when taken properly, in the right form, that probiotics can actually move the needle. The question is, once again, is what needle needs to be pushed for you?
That's right.
Right. So I actually did a 6-month supplementation of probiotics last year.
Okay.
And I went through a particular manufacturer that had very good data on moving the needle. And I did it for 6 months, and John, no difference in my gastrointestinal, and it was expensive. It was like $50 a month for 6 months. And I was like, well, tried it, didn't go so well. But the thing is that maybe I didn't have the right thing for me. And so maybe I'm going to try this Lactobacillus plantarum PS 128. And except for then I looked it up and it's $60 a month. And so, but if it solved my gastrointestinal issues and increased my endurance, oh my gosh, $60 is totally worth it. That's like one tire.
And isn't sauerkraut and pickles a little cheaper though?
So that's the thing, right? If we look at sauerkraut, pickles, yogurt,
fermented
kefir, kombucha,
kefir,
So the problem with those are they're not encapsulated to be protected from the stomach acid. So now, and there's a good research on this too, is like, even if you had a ton of live bacterium in those foods, would those actually get through?
Sure, right.
Like, because these are more advanced probiotics, they're actually putting it's called an enteric coating around the pill, so it gets through the stomach and gets deeper in. So and don't get me wrong, like I have yogurt every single day.
Right.
Like I don't eat ice cream anymore. Yeah, on an occasion I used to eat ice cream like every night. I switched to yogurt, and so if like a little bit gets through, that's a good thing. But I've always questioned that, and not that I don't enjoy a kombucha from time to time, or but I don't know how much gets through. And then
I don't know.
Don't even get me started on sauerkraut.
Why?
Well, here's the thing: is the process, especially if it's like a canned sauerkraut, is to pasteurize it.
Okay.
Well, what does pasteurization do?
Yeah, that sterilizes it.
It sterilizes it. So if you think you're going to go to the grocery store and get a can of sauerkraut and it's been pasteurized.
Yeah.
So you got to be very careful if the sauerkraut you get is not been pasteurized. Now, once again, you go to the farmer's market and a guy's home making it, there'd be a question like, are you boiling this?
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Because if you're boiling it, that's the purpose of that's pasteurization, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So that'd be the question I have is like, sure, it had a lot of bacterium to make the sauerkraut what it was, but is it, how many? I guess what we could do, John, we could go to the supermarket and get some and then take it to the lab and just look at it under the microscope, and do we see actually bacteria?
Yeah. Maybe it's the hot dog that it comes on. I don't know.
It could be the hot dog. The hot dog water at Costco might actually have some bacteria in it. I don't know.
I had a hot dog at Costco just to try it, and that made me nauseous. So
see, there you go. That made you nauseous.
I'm not used to certain foods that way. I haven't had a hot dog really in a long time.
The funny thing is, I actually like hot dogs.
Yeah.
Back in my old ski racing days, the lunch was always a chili dog.
Oh, interesting.
It was just what we got. Like, oh, it's chili dog time, and
So,
anyways, back to the probiotic thing. I think it's worth trying, but I would be careful looking at strains, and and maybe just try things. Like if you suffer from GI issues, is try something for a couple months. If there's no improvement, try something else. No improvement, try something else. And
I-
it can be expensive.
Yeah, and I think it's if you're having GI distress during training, that's one sort of category. But having GI distress, if you can only do it or only happens on a race day, that is a
It's a
different one.
different
But
thing. Yeah.
if you have it in training, then that allows you the opportunity to try different things and see how to avoid it. But and I think it's important, and we and I are talking about this right from the get-go, and is if someone's listening to this and you're having GI distress, realize you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that GI distress can be everything from dire uncontrolled bowel movements to an upset stomach and things coming up back out the mouth. So
Well,
it's thrown
and,
up.
and I'm going to be completely honest with everybody because, I shoot honest. I have GI issues in training. Like I
Yep.
have to plan my run that
Mhm.
there's a bathroom
Right.
available like within a mile,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And it's one of the things, especially when we travel, it's really difficult for me to find a place to run. And sometimes I'll literally just do a run where I'll be like wherever we're staying, I'll just do a loop,
Yeah. Right.
until I actually have diarrhea. And then I'm
Yep.
like, okay, I'm good. Now I can go run further.
Yep.
But it got to a point where I literally could not run more than 5 miles
Mm-hmm.
without having diarrhea.
Mm.
And that's why I've went down all these paths to
Yeah.
try and solve it. And it's better now, but it's still not great.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like I think I figured it out mostly for race day. The last couple of 70.3s I've had, I think I figured it out, but it's come down to like 2 days before, I've got to be ultra careful of what I eat.
Yeah. Right.
And,
Right.
but it's not a sustainable diet for me long term because
Mm-hmm.
what works for me is no vegetables,
Yeah.
no fruit. And, that's hard for me to do because
Yeah.
I love
Right.
vegetables and I love fruit
Right.
and the simplest foods. And when I mean simple foods, I'm saying like I'll have like hamburger and I will have a little vegetables, but it'll be like mashed potatoes, like
Mm-hmm.
overcooked mashed potatoes. So the cellulose is all broken down.
Yeah.
But definitely like you won't get a salad past me.
Mm-hmm. No.
Right.
Right. Right. And I think we both learned that. I mean, I do the same thing. I think it has to do with age too. In fact, one of the papers we read, separated out GI problems to over and under 40-year-olds.
Yeah.
And if you're over 40-year-olds, if you're in that category, here's certain things that to look at for GI distress. If you're under 40, it's over in this bin. And so, yeah, I've learned as I've gotten older, I've got to be really careful race week what to
Yeah.
eat and
Yeah. I'm thinking of even pushing it out to like 3 days.
mm-hmm,
I've been doing 2 days pretty good. And then, so I'm like, what do I care if it's 3 days?
yeah,
Because you mentioned the microbiome changes quickly.
yeah, right,
We can actually see microbiome changes when people, some of the interesting research is when people don't eat vegetables and don't eat
mhm,
fruit, and then they force feed themselves basically fruits and vegetables, their microbiome can change in 48 hours.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so, this is, and I guess, John, we're not giving people a lot of like maybe practical information here other than like, you gotta try things.
mm-hmm,
And the one last thing I'm going to add is if you get to a situation where this is chronic, like it was and sort of is for me, is work with a physician that will kind of, bend over backwards to run tests and try and figure these things out. And some of the tests, I gotta be honest, insurance isn't going to pay for.
mm,
And you got to keep turning over stones because it's not a good way to live, especially when you're training as often as we train. It hasn't really ruined a race for me. But like every time I've had to take a bathroom break in a half Ironman, it really makes me upset. Right?
right,
It's like,
right,
because it almost always invariably happens on the run.
mm-hmm,
And I've just passed 2 or 3 people. I go to the bathroom, I come out, and
yeah,
they're ahead of me now.
yeah, that's right,
And that's a mental blow,
mm-hmm,
right? And you miss the podium by 12 seconds. It's like, well, that 40 seconds I spent in the bathroom, there,
Mhm.
there it is.
But at the
And
same time, you can't, sometimes you have to, and it's the
you,
nature of that beast. Okay,
you,
so wait,
you
question
absolutely have to.
from Bob. He said, why no salad? What does it do?
Go ahead, John.
Well, it's fiber. And you're taking in something that is not easy to digest, and so it can move through the system, and you don't want a lot of stuff moving through the system. You want stuff going in that you're going to absorb and then use.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, you're cutting down on the actual volume of things that are going to move into your large intestine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, I've gone to just mostly rice pre-race. That's my staple for multiple days out, and not whole
Oh,
grain.
really? Just rice?
Well, rice, and I'll add some chicken in, but I
Yeah.
try to keep my race week food schedule really simple.
Yeah.
It's
No, and I love the idea of the chicken. Like I'm basically your meats are
hmm
almost 100% absorbed as long as you don't have huge portions,
yep,
right?
yep.
You keep yourself to 4 to 6 ounces.
hmm
Even like the day before, breakfast, lunch, dinner, 4 to 6 ounces of meat. I have no problem with it.
Yep.
I'm like you, simple things like rice. I do things like cereal.
Yep.
Like if you look at, I think we've mentioned this before, like Frosted Flakes,
Right.
there is no fiber in Frosted Flakes,
Okay.
right? Yeah, there's corn there, but it's been milled up so much that
Yeah. Yeah.
so you just look at the fiber content of like, I'll eat a whole box of cereal like in 2 days before a race, because it depends on the cereal, but like a children's cereal, like Captain Crunch or whatever,
Yep.
there's no fiber in those things.
No, that's true. Well, and it's interesting. One of the papers we read did talk about the starches to take in,
Yeah.
and there are different types of starches that are either good or not so good for you to take in.
It's so funny, right? Because one of the things that is, the hallmark of good health is like avoid over processed foods.
Yeah.
Well, part of the processing and why we want to avoid them is there's not it removes the fiber,
hmm
right? But in this case, over processed foods is probably what you want,
Yeah,
because
because I mean the negative of processed food is not, it doesn't have a lot of vitamins or nutrients. And it's like, well, we don't care about vitamins or nutrients for race day.
yeah. I'll just add one thing about vitamins and nutrients. Okay, so my wife struggled with iron issues. I know there are many women that struggle with iron issues more than men. Um, Captain Crunch has got like one serving has got like 40% of your RDA of iron.
Oh, nice.
So we, for a while there with my wife Marie, we're like, oh, you got to take your iron supplement, have a bowl of Captain Crunch.
There you
Okay,
go.
like
I
that's
love
a.
it.
It's so it is, but I mean it's fortified, but still it's the same as taking an iron supplement. It's yeah.
Well, and so this is good. This is good to talk about. It's hard because you're right. We're not giving a lot of here's the answer, because there is no answer to this,
Yeah.
at least at this point. And it's a hard subject, but I think it's important for people to know that you're not alone, and that it's hard to figure out the right nutrition plan. And if you're going to err on the side of making a nutrition plan, err on the side of making it simple.
And I would add one last thing is, if someone tells you this is how you're going to fix this, guaranteed, like do this, and
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, maybe they'll be lucky, right?
Mhm. And
But it's not there is no for sure in this world of this stuff.
that's right. And to that point, it's also important not to ignore this.
Yep.
And there can be this can be signs of other things. And
Yep.
so it is important that if you can't solve a GI problem, you got to go see someone about it.
Yeah. But I'd also contend, go to see somebody, in my experience, that's a sports medicine physician
Yeah.
that gets what we're doing. Because
hmm
I can tell you, like, if you came to me and I was a GP, nothing against GPs,
hmm
you want to solve your problem, you get the runner's trots, we'll run less.
Yeah.
Solved.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right.
Hey, every time I do an Ironman, I spend 20 minutes in the porta potty. Well, don't do an Ironman. Done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. It's a really easy thing to do, because what we do to most people is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And you go to a doctor and like, you're gonna run a 26 miles after you bike this and swam that.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't do that. And
that's right.
the reason your GI system is messed up is because you're doing this.
That's right.
So
That's so frustrating when we get that response from the healthcare team, and I know we all have stories about that, and it's frustrating. But this is why, one of the issues that, ACSM exercise is medicine. If you can get doctors or students in MD school to exercise and to get them to do physical education classes, then they link that medicine with the exercise, and that's actually really a benefit. So if you've got a doctor that exercises, hold on to that doctor. Him or her is so important. So
I could not agree more. And once again, look for those people that have that special certification of being
yeah,
a sports medicine fellow.
yeah.
And there are not many of them.
Mm-hmm.
In Las Vegas, we produce 1 or 2 a year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and
Hey,
they don't always stay here.
no, they don't. So we're not a huge community. I mean, not the endurance community, but just in general of Las
Yep.
Vegas. So
Yep.
it is interesting. So, all right. Well, what do you got planned this weekend?
I'm gonna go tomorrow to the Pro Bowl practice,
Oh,
which is
nice.
at the Las Vegas ballpark.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go check that out. Just something to do. It's close to where
Yeah.
I'm gonna be. Go there for a couple hours and see, just poke my head in and see what that's all about. Swim tomorrow morning. Then after that, go for a run.
Yep.
And Sunday, my heart says I should be riding outside, but I don't know. It's supposed to be like 15-mile-an-hour wind and
Oh, is it?
in 40. Oh, the time I normally ride like 45, 50 degrees. It's
Mm.
the trainer might have my name.
Yeah. Okay.
May have my name on. Maybe I'll do like start out on the trainer, go for a while, and then go outside. I always say that, but then I get going on the trainer and I don't go outside.
I
How about you?
Yeah, I'll do some consistent training this weekend, just trying to get it in and
Yep.
just keep things moving forward. So,
John, we've talked about many times, consistency it will trump everything else.
Yep.
I'm coming back from a hip injury, and just if I can just get a 5K run, 5K run, 5K, and just keep building the 5K, 6K runs, that's going to get me where I want to be. And
I love that. And the other reason why I still try to exercise even when things aren't going well is I try to hold that time in my day that this is what I do. And so even if it's an abbreviated exercise session, it's still part of the lifestyle, and just keep that going. So
yeah, exactly. Oh, I did just fun fact. I started doing yoga this week.
nice.
And I did 2 sessions, YouTube yoga.
Oh,
And this morning I was doing it and I was all twisted and convoluted. And I'm like, my wife was watching me and I was like, I think I'm doing this wrong. And she's like, yeah, you're completely wrong. Your leg is this way, it needs to be this way. So I'm having some fun with some yoga. And
nice.
I just, it's like, I need to mix something up. I need to just a little change. So, and it's been a long time. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since I did any yoga. And so I was like, give it a little go.
Good to explore.
It's, hey, you know what? Our bodies will adapt to what we put at it. And, I've been feeling a little bit limited, especially as I'm coming back to running after being injured of my ranges of motion. And so I was like, you know what, maybe just some more structured, it's like 15, 20 minutes of just movement.
Yeah, that's good.
In a different way.
All right. Well, have a good, safe weekend. And
Thank you.
Stay warm.
You too. Yeah, stay warm.
All right. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.